Welcome to Let's Get Tender, Money Conversations That Matter, a video podcast series with certified money coach Marlene Elizabeth, with amazing weekly guests who share their inner challenges, personal triumphs, and inside tips and strategies so you can prosper, lead, and love bravely in business and life. So get comfy and get ready to grow money wings.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Let's Get Tender, Money Conversations That Matter. I'm your host, Marlene Elizabeth, and I am so excited to be bringing you a very special interview. This is actually going to be a two-parter. So I hope that you will be able to not only join us today, but also tune in next week as well, because I have a fabulous guest that I really believe you're going to truly learn so much from, especially when we're talking about money. So today, my wonderful guest is David Fisher. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you.
So David, before we get started, I want to share a little bit with our viewers, a little bit about your background. So after being homeless several years ago, David Fisher is now an award-winning speaker and author. He has over 1,000 hours of stage time and has spoken at events like Be Inspired, TEDx, and Toastmasters conferences. He has done workshops for organizations such as Plenty of Fish and Create Change Now. He has coached other speakers for events such as Get Inspired, TEDx Stanley Park, and Tony Robbins' Power of Success. Through his company, davidfish.ca, he has inspired thousands of others to create a life of connection through storytelling, vulnerability, and influence. His just released book, Sales for People Who Don't Love Sales, but have to do it anyway, is currently available on his website. And we'll learn a little bit more about that later in the show. But just want to, again, warmly welcome you, David, to this conversation today.
Thank you, Marlene. I'm actually very excited to be here. So good. I'm looking forward to it.
Yay, yes. So I must share with you viewers, I have been so excited to chat with David. I was so impressed by a presentation that he gave, and I just knew I had to have him on this show because David has really focused on, right, David, on vulnerability in your writing, in your stories, in your storytelling, your presentations. It's a really powerful subject. And especially, I would say that, normally when I have conversations with my female friends, we tend to talk more about those conversations, but especially being like male, right? And talking about vulnerability, it's pretty powerful. And I know that there's just so much for us to be able to learn on this topic. So I know that when you shared your story, one of the things that you said was that that you had this pain so big that it was too painful to share, and that's kind of what really caught my attention. Can you share a little bit more about that piece when you were doing your presentation?
Yeah, and I'd be happy to. And a little bit of context for that was that I had grown up in the States, and I'm Canadian, but I grew up in the States and just had, middle income life, 2 kids, all of that, and came back to Canada. And everything at that point, long story short, really kind of fell apart. I got to a point where I didn't know how to pay rent, and looking through the couch cushions to try and find change. And if you find something, you're like, hey, do I take the bus to a job interview, or do I say, kids, let's go out to eat? We can buy French fries. That's our big weekly outing. And after being somewhat, as people would perceive, as somebody who's successful and has a family and a job and those types of things, and then coming to a place where you're in another country, even though it's very similar, but now there's nothing and there's no income. And I saw myself, rather than somebody who saw myself as just being a person living my life, I suddenly saw myself as a failure. I saw myself having to rely on my mom to pay my rent. I saw myself as identifying more with the homeless person than with the person of success. And when that happened, it began to really build a wall around me to say, wow, nobody's going to understand me. Nobody's going through this. I'm a failure. And every time I try and share this story, which I was scared to scare anyway, but I came from kind of a victim mentality. And I knew that. I was asking really for handouts rather than trying to figure out how I needed to change me. And what came out of that was the tremendous difficulty of learning how to be vulnerable and sort of starting to tear down that wall just a little bit, brick by brick, and saying, man, I need help, not because I want a handout, but because I need to change. And that had to start with me being honest with myself first, because I think sometimes we build a wall around ourselves to protect ourselves emotionally that we don't even know. And we have to sometimes kind of look in the mirror and say, oh yeah, I have some changes I need to make, whether it's my fault or not, because of the circumstances I was in. And I could legitimately say they weren't my fault, but nobody was coming to rescue me. So I still had to make those changes myself in order to overcome that. And that was very difficult, but it started with me, and then slowly then meeting other people then that can support and love me.
And you know, when, as one of the things I know that you shared in your presentation, that along this journey, what you discovered, which I thought was really profound, because we usually run away from vulnerability, but what you discovered is that not being vulnerable actually hurts you, and it also even hurts others. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and to take the scope big and make it small, we've evolved as a species not because we're the fastest or the strongest. We may not even be the smartest, but we've evolved because we've been able to create community. And we've been able to learn to work and live, for the most part, together. And learn from each other and share stories with one another and pass those on to our children and our children's children. And it's in our DNA to have to be vulnerable, and when we don't do that, we harden ourselves. There's a friend of mine that works very closely with finding your tribe and being connected with others. So there's a lot of synergy with what we do, and we do some things together. But one of the things he said is, if you're lonely, if you shield yourself from connecting with other people, that's equivalent to smoking almost a pack of cigarettes a day, because it hurts us physically. And we can feel that too when we feel isolated, when we feel like there's not that we can't share because everybody else's life seems perfect and ours isn't. Then that hurts us physically and it hurts us emotionally. But one of the things that I learned is, not only was it hurting myself to kind of bury all that inside of me and to shut down those emotions, but it closes myself off from connection with other people, and it closes off their connection with me. So when you start to share those things, as difficult as they may be, what you find more often than not is you find support, and you find acceptance, and you also find synergy, and you also find honesty, with many times them saying, oh my gosh, I've been there before too, or I'm there right now, or you're struggling with this and I'm struggling with this. Let's get together. Let's try and figure out how we can support one another and get through it. Not turn it into just, two people complaining for a couple hours and then leaving and not wanting change, but actually leaning and supporting on one another. And then you can leave and say, and they can leave and say, I'm not alone. There's somebody else out there, and I don't have to fight this battle on my own. And that's huge, psychologically as well as even just physically.
Ah, it's just so true, so powerful. Yes, absolutely. So just seeing how, stopping for a moment and really taking that in and recognizing how much, yeah, when we run so much away from being vulnerable, how much we're cutting ourselves off from the supply of the resources that we need to thrive. And sometimes that includes people, it includes opportunities, finance, money, right? Finances.
Yeah.
So it's that courageous step. But and I know that in your presentation you shared that, on a personal level, being more vulnerable creates a kinder, more connected world, right?
Yeah, and the story, when you share a story, you could share a story that in your brain takes a half a second, but then to explain it takes 45 minutes, because so much can happen when those revelations hit. I was walking down the street, I believe it was to a job interview and trying to find work in Canada, and literally really not having any income at all, and seeing a homeless person and identifying with that homeless person and saying, is that me? Is that how I'm going to have to feed my kids? Am I going to have to put my communication and sales skills to use by just holding out a hat on the sidewalk? And that's really internally sort of what I felt. That's sort of what I felt my worth was at. And then it hit me, and it was almost instantaneous. Like I could stop and look at that homeless guy and then keep walking, but inside my brain was just spinning in this timeless moment of saying, wait a second, nobody's coming. No hero is coming to save me. I need to save myself. And to answer your question, and it's a long-winded way to answer your question, but as a result of me then jumping into personal development, learning how I can change my own mindset in spite of my circumstances, in spite of whose fault it was, that I needed to overcome this myself and become a better me. But it enabled me to have much more empathy for the homeless guy, as well as for the business person who's struggling. And since then, I've talked to business people that say, yeah, on the outside, it's great. On the inside, I don't know how to pay rent. And so those are the types of things then that has allowed me, those circumstances, to say, wait a second, if we can all just connect on this level, we can learn how to support one another. And if we truly come from a place of understanding and empathy, then we can connect and become more kind, because it's the division that causes the problems. But if we can truly understand each other, even if we disagree with certain things, then our humanity can connect us and we can become problem solvers, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. It does. And it sounds like too, which is a topic all in and of itself, but the sense of powerlessness that we can feel and how that's reflected in our life around us. And that could be whether, like you were saying, in the experience of being homeless on the street, or even having all the wealth in the world and still feeling powerless in that, because the money is really what is in control and not you, so to speak. And so, and I know from a business point of view, entrepreneurship. So you had mentioned something in your presentation as well about the fact that when we expand our reach, which is essential when you're in business, right? You have to expand your reach. You have to be visible. But at the same time, the more your visibility goes up, the more your vulnerability goes up, right? Because then you start being susceptible, as you said, to emotional attacks. And that's hard. That's hard, right? So I know, like, for an example, a lot of times when I work with female entrepreneurs, they may come from the corporate world, and they have done, let's say, a really great job in their role in the corporate world. And so when they think, well, I'm going to start a business, I'll have no problem doing that because I'm so successful here. So then they get busy working on their programs and their offerings and their services. And then they get stuck because they can't get it out there. They're not getting their programs and services out there because suddenly it's that level of visibility and vulnerability that kind of starts to take effect. And so you shared just taking one step toward vulnerability at a time, right? And you shared really powerfully. This really stuck with me because you said, do this and trust this process of connecting with others and stepping into being vulnerable just one step at a time, because it might save a life, and that you were an example of that.
Yeah, and this goes all the way back to, and yet I can look through my life and say, oh, this has happened more than once, but maybe not necessarily saving a life. But there was a moment in my life, and this was way back in high school, but I didn't have a lot of friends, and the connections that I had, I felt like what you said, sort of powerless. And I was shy, I was awkward, and there's nothing wrong with being shy. I just didn't want to be shy. And I wasn't sure how to reach out. I wasn't sure how to connect with others. And originally I found theater. Theater was a way for me to express my emotions and my feelings and my vulnerability, but it was kind of safe. Like you could be emotionally vulnerable, but you knew the outcome because it was in a script. And it wasn't necessarily you were playing a part. So you could make the emotions real, but you're playing a character. And so there's a little bit of distance there. But it was a really important step for me to start to learn about myself. But that only started because as a shy, awkward kid who had no prior experience acting, to go to an audition, which was my second audition. It was at high school, but it's one of the top theater high schools in the country. And the director took a chance and said, I want you in this role. And there was others that came to her and said, what are you doing? Why are you putting this guy in this role? We have somebody else that can play this part. And she saw something in me that I wanted, but I didn't really even see in myself. But she took her experience and her insight and made a decision, an unpopular decision, to put me in that role. And since then, that got me on stage hundreds of times in theater and now public speaking. And it was that one pivotal choice that really altered and changed the course of my life. But she made herself susceptible to attack. She made herself vulnerable by saying, no, I want this person. And she raised her hand up and said, I'm going to do this. And that leaves us open to emotional attack. But there was a reward there for her and for me, because we still talk. She's retired now, but we still have a connection. We still have that. And I shared with her that story, and she was completely touched by it, because I don't think she even understood, how much that meant. But when we stand up for other people, not just ourselves, when we stand up for other people and support other people, that can mean that there are others who will say, I don't agree with that. And there's a vulnerability there. And so in a way, there's a vulnerability that means strength, because you have to be able to withstand that attack and not close yourself off again. You need to be able to stay open. But if you find other people to stay open with you, then you can, in a way, kind of watch each other's back.
I love this. I love this story. And I suspect that the secret sauce behind being able to do this is both someone believing in you and you believing in yourself. So on one hand, the fact that her actions helped you to see that this person believed in you. You were able to really experience that at a deep, almost cellular level. And that truth is so important for transformation in our minds, for us to go, oh, well, I must have something pretty special then if this person believes in me. They're willing to stick their neck on the line. And then for her to be able to be in a position where she could be vulnerable enough to say, I believe in this. And even if I'm being attacked in all direction, it's because she believes enough in herself, believed enough in herself to know that I know what I know. Even if others can't see it yet, I know what I know. And that does take that secret sauce of believing in yourself. I once heard a quote that, believing in yourself is the safest place to be.
That's good. I like that.
So as you share your story, and it is a powerful one, and it's one that's it's so exciting to see you thriving on stages now and sharing this really important message, and from the perspective of this show, when we're talking about a relationship to money, I know one of the things that you kind of put together a little mini easy to remember formula about how you can be more effective in connecting with people. And in this perspective, I think it works really well with female entrepreneurs when they're trying to connect with their audiences, that there's a real correlation between increasing your visibility and your vulnerability also increases cash flow revenue, because people get what you're saying from a heart level. If you're sharing what you're doing from an intellectual level, like you said, like news story, which is all the facts, it doesn't really connect and resonate. But when you are able to share from your heart and your story, your struggles, and so I wanted you to share a little bit. I know you called it, well, the acronym was SHE, which is she, which I love. I don't know if you intended it to be that way, but can you share a little bit about kind of the strategy, how to connect?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. And I'm glad you brought that up. It's the SHE acronym is story, heart, and empathy, because and nowadays, especially with all the information coming at us, I get 100 emails a day of offers, and I can help you grow your business and blah, 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 and all this stuff. And I just delete most of them. But if I have that one that somebody said something specific that I knew that they took the time to get to know me, even if it's just online, or I saw the speech on video and I heard what you said and I really connected with that, then at least that gets my attention. And so we all are out there, and as entrepreneurs, there's other products and services that other people are going to provide that are going to be similar to yours. It's just the way it is. But you will do, and Jeffrey Shaw says this, who's a business coach in Florida. He says you will do business with people you get, and they get you. And that's where the story comes in, that you have to share your story. A part of that story is not just like what you said. It's not just a news story. It's a short story. You have to know, this is my passion of why I'm doing what I'm doing. Here's why I'm in business. Here's why I have this service or product. Was the thought process. Here's the struggles that came out of it, but here's what I have. And people can relate to that. And if they can relate to that, then they say, oh yeah, I think I want to do business with you. So S is story, H is heart, because you don't want to make it, like I mentioned, a news story. You do want to make it a short story. You want to share about how you feel, and allow yourself to have that vulnerability of really showing a hint of what those emotions are, and put yourself in a place where you remember what the struggles are. And you don't have to stay there, but your body language, your voice, the way you talk, just momentarily, you can say, man, that was hard, but here's what's come out of it. And here's why I'm so excited to be able to help you, or to have this product or service to get out to the world, because I realize that it can make a difference. And if we do the story and the heart, and then the final piece is empathy, that if we genuinely listen to who we're serving, who our clients, who our partners, who our customers might be, then we find the right ones that connect with us. And that's one of the things that I share in my book, is keep asking questions, keep building that connection. Don't just jump in with what you offer. Really get to know that client or that potential customer, because if you get to know them and you understand each other, the sale will take care of itself. It's processes that you can that you can follow, but the hard work now is already done because you understand them. And so when we do story, heart, and empathy, we create a connection. Even if there's not a money transaction, there's a connection. And out of those connections will come success.
Yes, absolutely. That's a great point, that it may not come in that particular transaction, but it's still going to come back in some way. And the more that we're sharing in this level, it's just that genuineness, right? It's just that being very authentic and genuine. And really, even though it feels like a contradiction, that's truly where our power lies. Mm-hmm. Because it's more of the truth. It's more of the truth. And I've shared this before, but one of my favorite quotes is around the topic of humility. And it's a C.S. Lewis quote. And he shared that humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's about thinking of yourself less. And the reason that I shared this quote is because a lot of times when we talk about vulnerability, we don't want to share our weaknesses. We don't want to share, our shame, our struggles. We don't, that's not like the sexy side of life. That's not what's going to attract people to us, we think, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet it's not so much that, it's not so much the fact that it's more about being able to be connected with somebody who's not so absorbed in their own self. We can connect more with people that are more, that are more just not so self-focused. And so sometimes I think vulnerability ties with that. It ties with not being so self-focused. It's just allowing yourself to just be who you are. Just be who you are, and trust that when it comes to business, that makes quite an impact. It really, really does. And of course, you want to have all your ducks in a row with the business side. But when you're talking about your story, really being able to be honest about the fact that, there's just such truth, I think, that's revealed. And when people are exchanging dollars, they need to be able to trust you. They need to be able to know, like, and trust you. And so there has to be that aspect of truth that you're reflecting back to them, that they can pick up on and know that, okay, this is the right person for me. This is the right product, service for me, you know? So yeah, I just feel like this topic of vulnerability is just so important when we're talking about money. Is there anything else you'd like to add to, David, to this whole topic that we're talking about here today?
I think it's interesting because you're talking, and I'm like, oh, that's good. I might throw that in the message is that part of the vulnerability is not just us sharing our story, but allowing ourselves to feel another person's story. And so when we're talking to a client, and actually I coach this when I coach speakers, one of the things that I focus on is an emotional connection from the speaker to the audience. And so once all the prep work is done and you know that speech, just like you know your product or your service, once all that work is done, the focus then isn't on that. It's not on you, it's on them. So when I tell speakers, and this can apply for entrepreneurs as well, you're not thinking about your product or service because you already know it, like the back of your hand, you know it. You can roll with that. But now your focus is so much on the other people or on the audience. Now, rather than saying, oh, what can I get from you? Oh, I hope I get the sale. Oh, I hope they like me. I hope I get a standing ovation. You can say, how can I serve you? And I even caught myself the other day with this, is that I have an international connection, which could lead me into other parts of the world that I haven't been to yet, to do my workshops and presentations. And when I had that connection, every conversation after that was me pursuing that connection for the end result of maybe getting this international deal. And it finally occurred to me yesterday to say, wait a second, this person is offering this, but I've offered nothing in return. How selfish is that of me? How unvulnerable of that is me? And so I just sent her a message the other day and say, and by the way, I've had some great conversations with you, but how can I serve you? How can I help you? And she said, that's a really good question. You know what, let me get back to you on that, because I actually might need some help with the project in the future. It was me shifting that from saying me to saying, hey, it's not about me. It's about you. How can I serve you? Now there's no pressure, because now, hey, the transaction may or may not happen, but now we're helping each other. And if you're focused on the other person, whether you're giving a speech or you're selling a product, then that's a win situation, because even if the transaction doesn't happen, you've created a fan, you've created a connection, you've created somebody talking good about you.
It's so true. It's a whole different mindset. It really is. And it takes consciousness, like, in other words, like a conscious awareness of how we're showing up. But I find that the most successful people in business know their sense of power, like they know their worth, they know it. And because of that, as a result, they could be more focused on the people they serve. And I find in my own life, when I have struggled with my sense of self-worth and my sense of power or powerlessness, when I've done that in my own life, I find that I become more internally focused. And then that kind of causes my business to kind of limp along, right? Because other people pick up on it. But when I can show up, and so it's a lot of the entrepreneurship, like they say, it's like the best personal development program ever. Like, you become a PhD in personal development, because to be an entrepreneur, right, it requires you to constantly work on your own stuff. But I think that by being able to be more vulnerable and open with each other, it's kind of like reaching out a hand to each other and saying, I've been there. How can I give you a few tips to help you? Because I've been there. And, it makes us, it's ironic, because it makes us even more powerful to be vulnerable. It's ironic, but that's how life is.
Yeah. Weird, huh? Yeah, totally.
So before we wrap up, because I want to say, and viewers, you may notice that this interview has gone differently than all my interviews ever before, but this topic is just so compelling, and it's so important for us to take some time to really process it and take time in our life to really stop and think, how do we need to take one step to being more vulnerable in our life? So we're going to actually be doing a two-parter with David, because usually the interviews flow in such a way where we get to chat about our guests, about their relationship to money. And that is coming next week. So, but for this week, just really wanted to dive into this topic. And I know another wonderful author on this is Brene Brown. Are you familiar with Brene Brown? Right, right.
Yeah.
wonderful also
Yes.
resource on the topic of vulnerability. But before we wrap up, David, I'd love for you to share a little bit about your book. This is wonderful. I love this book. And also, how can people learn more about maybe getting a copy of it and learning more about where you speak and your services?
Absolutely. Yeah, and you can reach me at davidfish.ca. My last name is Fisher, but just made it simple with David Fish, like the fish that swims in the ocean. davidfish.ca. And if you're interested in workshops or me to come speak or do a workshop at your business or whatever, just send me an email. Let's just connect. Let's just be vulnerable and see what happens. But also for all of the listeners, up through the end of May, my book is just released. It's digital only right now on my website. There will be a hard copy. It will go on Amazon. All of that stuff is in play. But if you want to get kind of a pre-release digital, I'll give it to you guys for listeners for free. Just go to davidfish.ca/thrive, THRIVE, and then you guys can download that for free. And then just I'd love your feedback on what that's like. But it's called Sales for People Who Don't Love Sales but have to do it anyway, because it's really meant for entrepreneurs who have this great product or service and they want to share it with the world, but the idea of selling it stresses them out. And I've been in sales off and on for 20 years, and I don't love it, but I've learned how to do it. And hint, it's more about connection and vulnerability than sales, but there's a system that's in the book that you guys can take advantage of. I'd love to give that to you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Wonderful gift. Thank you so much. And I highly encourage you, if you're watching this show, please do visit David's website and take a look at his book. And also leave him a testimonial as well. Email him a testimonial. Let him know what you think of the book. So again, David, thank you so much for joining us today. I know we're going to talk again next week and dive a bit more into your money story. But I just wanted to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your wonderful tips on how to be more vulnerable in this world.
My pleasure. Can't wait for part 2. We'll see you soon.